I think how those minutes are distributed has to do with so many things. How they're playing on that day, foul trouble, and how the game's going. And so I do think Carolina has had the need more often here recently to have multiple ball handlers on the court at the same time. And so that's what having R.J. Davis and Caleb Love out there together does for you, is that it's harder to press, it's harder to give you pressure in the backcourt because you have two guys who are good ball handlers, who are good free throw shooters, and who have practiced all year long to handle that responsibility. And so, the Duke game where Duke pressured so much in the second half,
right,
which Carolina did not handle very well. Florida State, which is just a team that traditionally pressures defensively a whole bunch. Carolina's played those teams a fair amount here recently. And so I think that's why you've seen them out there together more often, is that they've needed that ball handling. And, I think R.J. Davis's play has warranted some of that as well, because he has been effective, as we talked about, particularly in the ACC tournament. And so he warranted some more minutes because Carolina was better when he was on the court because of the way he was playing.
Let's talk about the NCAA Tournament, Jones. Carolina finished the regular season 5-4, so that brought a lot of discussion about them making the tournament. Because of it was just a down year for the ACC. What were your thoughts of Carolina ultimately being an 8th seed, despite having 11 quad 1 and 2 wins and a strong showing in their conference tournament?
Yeah, I think that's about where it seemed like Carolina was settling in everybody's projections, and people who follow it much more closely from the trend and statistical side of things than I do. That's where Carolina was falling. It seemed to be somewhere in that 7, 8, 9, 10 range. I think if Carolina had beaten Florida State and beaten Georgia Tech for the ACC tournament title, maybe the Heels scoot up to a 6 or something like that, because of how well that they would have been playing results-wise at that point. But this is probably about right for the season that Carolina has had. The Tar Heels have had, as we said, an inconsistent year with some really good moments, but then some not as good moments. And when you have an inconsistent year, but you're clearly good enough to be a team included in the NCAA tournament, then you end up with a little bit of a middling seed, and that's where the Tar Heels find themselves this season. And so, I think the really interesting thing, Joshua, is how so many people seem to be disappointed, and I get that. I mean, Tar Heels are used to being a 1 or a 2 seed, and they have more 1 seeds than anybody else in the history of the game, and I get that. But let's not forget that the Tar Heels weren't very good last year, and they brought in a whole bunch of new guys, and this feels like a reasonable step forward this season for Carolina when you consider where the Tar Heels were a season ago. Now, was there the opportunity for this to be better? Yes, I think there was. You get some of those games that are just the head-scratching performances, like at NC State or the Marquette game at home or at Clemson, where you just had some games where Carolina didn't play very well. And if you get some of those, maybe your seed is better. But I think Carolina's shown some growth this year, and certainly depending on the roster makeup next season, you would expect them to take another step forward next season. And so, this feels about right. And the good news for Carolina is they've got a coach who's been through this a whole bunch, who has a lot of success in the NCAA tournament. Carolina has actually had a fair amount of success from the 8th seed in its history. And so maybe some of that will come together and Carolina can put together a run.
That was going to be my next question, because Carolina, as an 8th seed, has made both the Sweet 16 and the Final Four, and they've never lost in the 8-9 matchup. They're 3-0 all time. What should our expectations be for this team as an 8th seed in the NCAA tournament?
Well, as fun as those numbers are, and as great as they are, they don't have anything to do with what Carolina is going to do against Wisconsin on Friday night, because it's a totally different team and totally different scenarios, and they just don't go together. What I think that those numbers and those stats and that history tells you is that Carolina is traditionally, both under Coach Smith and under Coach Williams, teams that are playing their best this time of year and that are capable of having success in the NCAA tournament regardless of seed. And so the consistent there is the leadership. The players are different, but the leadership is the same. And so you hope that that leadership and guidance that Coach Williams and his staff have from so many years, in his 33rd year now in total, 18th at Carolina, that is something that the younger players and that this particular group can lead on to hopefully have success. I think the tricky part about that, and particularly the two runs that you referenced there, and they were, one of them was in 1990 when Carolina made the run to the Sweet 16. They beat Oklahoma, who was the number one seed that year, in the second round. Then Carolina got all the way to the Final Four in 2000. They beat Stanford in the second round, who was the number one seed. But both of those teams also had really veteran guards. The 90 team, King Rice was a junior. In 2000, Ed Cota was a senior.
Right.
And those guys were big parts of their success in those runs. Carolina does not have a junior or senior point guard, neither as a starter nor as a reserve. And I think that's been a big thing this year, that you don't have a Nate Britt or a Quentin Thomas or somebody like that who is a veteran player who's behind the younger guard who can come in and just calm things down if needed. Tar Heels don't have that. And so I do think that is worth keeping as a caveat as you watch Carolina go in this tournament, is that they are running with some young guys at the point guard spot. But certainly Carolina is, at this point, you're in the tournament. That's what you wanted to do. You have your opportunity. And now I know it's boring, but you just take it one game at a time. You look at your individual matchup that you have this game, and how can you best be successful in this game, and that's what the Tar Heels are concerned about.
Let's talk about the matchup with Wisconsin. The Badgers come in very experienced. They start 5 senior guards, and they play the 6th toughest schedule in college basketball. Carolina enters the least experienced team in the field of 68. Wisconsin wants to slow the game down, so that means turnovers and free throws become all more important for Carolina. Ultimately, what's it going to take for Carolina to advance to the second round?
Yeah, when it's like the tournament committee, which, by the way, Bubba Cunningham, Tar Heel AD, was a part of this year, his first year on the committee. It's as though they said, what's like the complete opposite of the Tar Heels, and let's get them matched up in the first round. And that really is it with Wisconsin. You said it. I think the two things that are the most dominant factors with the Badgers are their experience and their pace. And they are very, very old, a bunch of seniors and fifth-year seniors, and they slow it way down. It's the way they like to play. They don't turn it over a lot. The possessions are going to be really low in the game, and those are all things that you have to take into consideration. For Carolina, I do think the Heels have a significant advantage in the post, like Carolina does a lot of games that the Tar Heels play. Wisconsin has a negative rebounding margin on the season. That means on average their opponents are out rebounding them every single game on average. And so Carolina should have a sizable advantage there. But to me, and we mentioned it earlier, the turnovers are the key, because the possessions are going to be lower in this game. And so even if you have a game for Carolina that's an okay game turnover-wise, let's say that's 13, which in a normal game you'd say, okay, not a terrible game turnover-wise. But that's in a game where you may get 85 possessions. If you're only getting 65 possessions, right, and you still turn it over that many times, then you're getting yourself in some big trouble. And so if Carolina can take advantage of its size in the post, its ability on the glass, and not turn the ball over, it will put itself in the best position to win this game.
Lastly, Jones, it's been a weird year for college basketball and sports in general. Y'all have done games both on-site and remotely. What are the plans for the Tar Heel Sports Network for the NCAA Tournament?
Yeah, we'll be there. So we're going to keep what we have done for a large majority of our road games. And as you mentioned, we have done a handful remotely this year. But I will be on site with the Tar Heels. We'll be in Mackey Arena for the game against Wisconsin. Our engineer, Ben Alexander, will be there. And Adam Lucas is going to be there with us, helping us out with some stats and notes and things like that. Dave Nathan and Eric Montross will be back in our Tar Heel Sports Network studios in Chapel Hill. Mm-hmm. We're going to integrate Eric into the broadcast both pre-half, post, and a little bit in the action as well when it makes sense. With him being, of course, remote, it's a little harder for him to just naturally be a part and speak during the action. So we'll integrate him in as well, and that's simply to keep the amount of people there at a lower number for us. And so it has been a challenging year from a logistical standpoint, to say the least, but we hope we can go 6 more games here with the Tar Heels and then catch our breath and get ready for football season.
Well, Jones, I just want to thank you for taking some time out of your ever-busy schedule to come on and talk about the Tar Heels with me. Have a good call tomorrow night. We'll talk down the road, sir.
Thanks, Joshua. Always appreciate the time.
All righty, goodbye. And there you go, guys. That is the voice of the Tar Heels, Jones Angell, to come on and talk about all things Carolina, but most importantly, get you guys ready for tomorrow's matchup with Wisconsin. Well, that's going to do it for this edition of the Roy's Boys podcast. We'll let you go. Get you guys over to the website, HeelToughBlog.com. We got you covered football, basketball, and baseball. Basketball side of things, I have a breakdown of Carolina's region for the NCAA Tournament, and Sarah Wiley has your preview up for the matchup with Wisconsin. I'll be taking you guys through the postgame of all Carolina's games in the NCAA Tournament. On the football side of things, we're just under a week away from the start of spring camp. Anthony, we get you guys ready for what's going to be a very exciting spring camp for Mac Brown and the Tar Heels. On the baseball side of things, we got you covered as well with every weekend recap after every weekend series. Carolina's got a big one this weekend with Boston College. I'd like to encourage you guys to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast. You can find us on every major podcasting feed, most notably Spreaker, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, TuneIn, Google Podcasts. Give us a like. Give us we want you guys to subscribe that we get every great interview, every great episode of the Roy's Boys podcast right there in your podcast library. Well, with that, I do want to thank Jones once again for coming on to talk a little Carolina basketball. We thank you guys for listening, and as always, go Tar Heels.